everyone, I'm back with some more piano tips, and today I would like to talk about melodic phrasing and polyphony and just how to play a proper melody in general. First of all, you have to organize how you want to work with your melodies. Sometimes your first step can be finding your melody. This might seem really obvious, but sometimes when the melody is in the left hand or in second voice, for example, you might actually miss it at first. So this is step one, find your melody. The second step is plan your melody. You might feel like musically it's a lot easier to just roll with everything and just play as it feels and comes, but without planning the melody you won't be able to phrase it properly and to plan it out like you would do with a storyline. So find the little phrases that characterize your melody and decide where you want to breathe and where you want to take breaks. And the third step would be to practice the melody separately before adding the accompaniment. This is really important even if you feel like the melody is pretty simple, because as I mentioned in my first video about piano technique, a melody should often be song-like and you should be able to sing the melody, which means that you will take your breaks and breaths naturally. And it's always worth it just to try it out without the accompaniment before adding something to it. I'll show you on a theme from Chopin's Second Scherzo, which is a really beautiful but also very, very long melody. So naturally you will have to decide at what point you want to breathe a little bit so that it doesn't become an endless line. As you can hear, a lot of the breathing I do is so small that it's hardly noticeable, but it's still important. Also, every little rubato you do, you should try out first without the accompaniment to make sure that you like it that way. Also, since this piece is written by Chopin, of course the accompaniment isn't really simple or anything. It has a lot of character to itself. It has some kind of polyphonic structures, which we will get to later how to play that. So after these first basic steps, I'd like to introduce you to some difficult situations where you need to manage your melody wisely. One typical situation for me would be a melody that is kind of embedded in chords. So it might be on top, it might be in the middle, but you have a whole chord around it. So how do you really stress the melody so that it shines on top? I have another example by Chopin, his Opus 10 number 11 Etude, which is only built out of chords. So these are very large chords, which makes it even more difficult for the melody to shine through because there's just so much other notes going on there. What you have to try to do is put more weight into the finger that you know will play the melody. In this case, this will usually be the fifth finger. Weight is always a better option than applying pressure. If you apply too much pressure on your finger, the attack will be very sudden and kind of hard and rough, like this. And if you manage it with weight, it will be more like that. I hope you can hear the note is just more free somehow, and it can really sing and develop. So this is what you have to do with only your fifth finger, which is pretty hard to do. So there's another little trick you do, and that is holding the note a tiny little bit longer. Even though in the chord all the notes have the same length, if you know where your melody is, you will try to hold the melody just a tiny little bit longer. Even though all the notes in the chord have the same length, if you hold the melody a tiny little bit longer, you'll be able to listen to it a lot easier. As usual, the advice, practice slowly and only speed up if you have tried out everything you want to do in a slow tempo. Even though this can be fairly difficult and take quite a lot of time until it works out, don't forget the first steps. You still have to organize your melody, you still have to know where you're going to breathe and where your phrase ends. It really helps me a lot imagining that the one finger I play the melody with just weighs a lot more than the other fingers, because the other fingers have to be really light to provide the background for this melody. The last important point would be fingering. In this particular etude, you don't have a lot of choice because the chords are so large that you will need all your fingers and the melody can only be played with the fifth one. But in other places, you might have a choice, and that's when you have to put some thought into it. In the ending phrase of this nocturne, you have a very tight legato that has to be created, and so you really have to watch the fingering of your melody. This brings us directly to our next topic, which is polyphony. You can already hear that these chords are not a mere accompaniment anymore. They're mostly counterpoints or second melody. This is something that goes way back in classical music, of course. You should know polyphony from Bach. In his pieces, the amount of voices is usually really clear, and it's not very hard to find them because they kind of stay on one spot. This is a rather simply structured prelude with 3 voices. As soon as you get to polyphonic structures, you should really pay attention to each single melody, even if the melody is rather simple structured, because particularly the very long notes inside a melody that might not be the first melody really need your attention, so the listener can still follow that one melody even if it just has one note at a time. Like in the beginning of this prelude, you have a very long note in the left hand, and if you don't follow it actively, you will lose it along the way before something else happens. So to incorporate this into the melody, I continue very softly after the long note to make the decrescendo sound intended. This is one of the little tricks you can do to make a melody sound more natural. But polyphonic structures exist a lot later in classical music as well. If you encounter polyphonic structures in romantic music, it might be a little bit more difficult because sometimes it's not that easy to follow the melody anymore. The more complicated it gets, the more you might be in need to regard every melody separately, even if it's just a small fragment. So take the piece apart and really practice the single melodies. The next situation is if the melody you have is in your left hand, and this should not be underestimated because our left hand is weaker than the right hand a lot of times. In the Chopin Etude Opus 10 number 8, the right hand plays this typical virtuoso big movements while the left hand actually has the melody. This is a very good example of how hard it is not to neglect the left hand because the right hand is so complicated. But this is exactly what you have to do. You have to practice the left hand and to make it really stand out. And again, do the same steps. Organize your melody and find the phrases you want to articulate. And only then you add the right hand after a lot of practice. I think the most difficult part for the left hand is to play the same kind of legato the right hand would. Our right hand is used to do this a lot of times, but our left hand might not be. In this other etude we have a slow example, Opus 25 number 7, and here the left hand plays in a kind of cello-like style and the legato becomes more important than ever. About legato tips, you can watch the first video I did, and everything we did for the right hand there goes for the left hand as well. The last thing I want to talk about are hidden melodies. I might have mentioned this in the beginning before, but finding your melody isn't always that simple. And sometimes the little fragments of a counterpoint or other melodies are so beautiful you don't want to neglect it. And a very typical situation is if you have a melody that has been played before and now you repeat it but in a different variation. So in Chopin's ballad, we've already experienced the melody in the beginning. And now this theme returns in a new variation with a whole lot of other melodies and counterpoints in it. This is a good opportunity to focus on some new melodies and new motives maybe, but at the same time not to lose the old melody out of sight. So maybe you want to do the second melody with the 16th a little bit more melodic and melancholic. Or the left hand with its large chords, you can stress that a little bit. This way you can learn something new about the piece you play every time actually. And that's what I really love doing, finding little fragments of melody that you haven't found before. I hope you have fun trying out these piano tips and see you next time.